So there's a very interesting article that's kind of trending out there. Apparently, the Las Vegas Raiders are under a mandate from the ownership to go out there and get a quarterback. This is an insider in Albert Breer who's putting this information out. And I find it interesting what he has to say within this article. And I want to kind of just read it to you guys because I think the Raiders should get a quarterback, but should they be mandated to get a quarterback? And we'll talk about what that means a little bit later on. But Albert Breer is saying that he heard the football people within the Raiders building could be under a mandate to draft a quarterback in April. He said, and if that's the plan, whoever the head coach is will have a pretty big impact on who that quarterback is and how he develops early on in his career. This makes the question whether Mark Davis believes Pierce would be the right guy to captain the ship. Now, Albert Breer in this same article also kind of put it in there that the Raiders coaching staff has not been given assurances that they'll actually be here going into next season. So Albert Breer kind of tied all that together, basically saying that it's not guaranteed Antonio Pierce will be here next year, and his coaching staff has not been told that they'll actually be here, right? Albert Breer is putting it out there that the coaching staff has not been told. And I find that interesting as well, right? Because if the Raiders, if Antonio Pierce knew that he was going to 100% be here, he would have already told Patrick Graham and Rob Leonard, and he would have already told Edgar Bennett and, all these other guys on the coaching staff. He would have already told these guys that we will be back, right? Or you guys specifically will be back coming into next year. So you have nothing to worry about. But Albert Breer is putting it out there that the guy that he spoke to on the Raiders coaching staff said that they don't really know, right? Nothing's been ultimately told to them. Now, I think it's fair to note that if that was an offensive coach, it could be a little bit different than if it was a defensive coach, right? Truth be told, the Raiders are probably going to bring in a new offensive coordinator. They'll probably be bringing a whole new staff on the offensive side, right? You'll get a new pass game coordinator. You'll get a new run game coordinator. You'll get a whole new offensive line coach, which doesn't mean Joe Philbin won't necessarily be here if AP is still here. But it's different. If you talk to Patrick Graham, he might tell you that, hey, I'm guaranteed to be here next year, right? So it is interesting. But the other part of what Albert Breer is ultimately saying is that there could be a mandate to draft a quarterback in April. And I find that kind of interesting, right? Because it's not guaranteed that the Raiders are going to have a top 2 or 3 pick. And they might not get the first 2 quarterbacks. Are you still going to force the Raiders to take a quarterback if 2 quarterbacks are off the board? I think it's an interesting question that we got to talk about, right? Plus, I think it's also interesting to kind of note that Aiden O'Connell had a really, really good game against the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, I'm not 100% sold on Aiden O'Connell, right? I like Aiden O'Connell. I like what he showed, but I've still watched enough of his tape where I know there's limitations, and we can't overlook the limitations part. Plus, if we have the number 1 overall pick, I think it's a little bit different than if you have like the number 5 overall pick, right? If you have the number 5 overall pick, 2 quarterbacks are off the board, I think you realistically consider Aiden O'Connell going forward. But if you have the number 1 overall pick, you got to realize you're probably not going to have the number 1 overall pick for a long time after that, right outside that. So I think it's going to be interesting as we kind of go forward to really figure it out. Another thing to note with the Raiders is, as we go into the rest of these next 5 games, right, we're going to figure out a lot about this team. But the biggest thing we're going to figure out is the offensive coordinator the right guy for the job? Is the quarterback the right guy for the job? Because I think Aiden O'Connell should have every opportunity to prove he's the guy of the future for the Raiders. I was reading an article earlier, and the guy made some good points. He was talking about Aiden O'Connell, and he was comparing it to some of the quarterbacks coming out of this draft. And this guy was making the point that Aiden O'Connell is a better pro-ready quarterback than these other guys, right? These other guys struggle to play within structure, right? These other guys aren't as good if your offensive coordinator designs, Mills, or if he designs dagger, or if he designs some sort of concept. Aiden O'Connell's much better at putting the ball where it needs to go. Guys like Shedeur Sanders holds onto the ball a little bit too long. Cam Ward, it took him 5 years for him to finally be able to kind of put it together. And we don't even know if that's coaching or if that's actually him as a really, really good football player, right? So some people are saying that there's a chance it might make sense to go forward with Aiden O'Connell. He might actually give you the best chance to have success going into next season. And I might agree with that, right? But I also do understand that being good next season might not be the same as drafting a quarterback and being good in 5 seasons from now and potentially competing for a Super Bowl, right? I think the ceiling of Aiden O'Connell compared to those other 2 guys is obviously a lot different, right? Now, that doesn't mean AOC can't develop and get a lot better, but I think that's why these next 5 games are going to be very, very important. But as Albert Breer is putting it out there, Mark Davis might actually mandate the Raiders to get a quarterback. Now, I would find it interesting to see, does that actually mean to draft a quarterback, or does that mean to potentially go out there and say there's a quarterback available via free agency? Maybe it's a guy available for trade. Uh, you know, it's not guaranteed that the Raiders are going to be forced to quote unquote draft the quarterback. And I would find it interesting to see if Mark Davis is going to try to force Tom Telesco or Antonio Pierce to go out there and draft the guy. Right? If you miss out on Cam Ward, if you miss out on Shedeur Sanders, and let's just say Jalen Milroe ends up coming out, and let's say he's QB3 on most people's board, are you going to take this guy when, if you don't take him, he might still be available in the second round potentially? Or what about if it's that next quarterback that may actually still be available, right? To me, it's interesting to see what the Raiders are actually going to do in the NFL draft, because with Mark Davis mandating to draft the quarterback, what does that actually look like? You know, Tom Telesco did a great job being able to get a quarterback for the Los Angeles Chargers. They're in a situation where if they had Phillip Rivers, long time, started to struggle because he got older, and they're ready to move off of Phillip Rivers, but they needed to make sure they were in a good spot. They needed to make sure the draft, where there were enough quarterbacks that they'd be able to get one, that they were able to go in there with a good enough pick, and then he had to make the right decision as well. Now, to be fair, every quarterback that was available when he picked were going to be good quarterbacks, right? Because the three quarterbacks that got drafted after Justin Herbert, you got Herbert, you had the choice of Jalen Hurts, you had the choice of Jordan Love. If you took any of those three quarterbacks, it would have probably worked out for you. And I know people are going to say that with Tom Telesco, but regardless, he still took Justin Herbert, and I think some people still argue Herbert is better than Hurts and Jordan Love. Although I personally think Jordan Love is going to be the best quarterback out of that class in 2 or 3 years. That's also kind of projecting, and that could be wrong as well. But, you know, Tom Telesco, however you look at it, still ended up getting a quarterback that ended up working out for the Chargers, right? So the Raiders now are going to have to make a decision on a quarterback as well, and we're basically putting it in the hands of Tom Telesco. Now, Albert Breer is also putting it out there that Antonio Pierce will be a key part of developing that quarterback if the Raiders actually keep him around, right? And I find that interesting as well because, you know, Norv Turner in the past has had success, obviously, with quarterbacks. He's done a really, really good job in the past. And his son, Scott Turner, for the first time, will kind of go through that as well if the Raiders actually kept him around going into next season. And I think based off of what we saw in the past 3 weeks and what we'll probably see in the next 5 weeks, I think there's a good chance Scott Turner is going to be the offensive coordinator next year for the Raiders, which also means I think there's a good chance Scott Turner and Norv Turner will actually be the guys to develop that quarterback. And I think it's an important question to ask. Do we trust that those two guys can develop quarterbacks? I think Norv Turner has done a good job in the past, but are we 100% sure these guys are going to be able to do it? All right, so it's going to be an interesting offseason as the Raiders kind of get into it. There's so many question marks. You know, we were told that the Raiders wanted CJ Stroud, and apparently someone stopped the Raiders from trading up to get CJ Stroud. Apparently there was a trade in the works as well that, you know, could have ultimately been done. And then at the same time, we were also told that the Raiders wanted to move up for Jaden Daniels, and that was stopped because the Commanders were like, we're not willing to take 3 first-round picks. We want Jaden Daniels, right? And now we're getting to the point where, you know, is it going to work out for the Raiders? Like, is this the draft that you want to take a quarterback? There's so many things that are coming out with the quarterbacks coming out of this class. One of the things that I'm hearing, and I don't know if this is fact or not, right? But one of the things I'm hearing is that these quarterbacks are not going to be as good as even what people are saying. You know, when we came in, people were like, this class is really, really good. Now, what the most recent thing is there's probably 2 quarterbacks worthy of first-round picks. I'm actually hearing there might be no quarterbacks worthy of a first-round pick, right? Some people are actually saying that we might not even have a quarterback taken in the first round, right? So I don't know if that's 100% true or not, but that's something that I heard recently, which would kind of surprise me. I think Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders definitely show some upside, and we'll see what ends up happening, right? At the end of the day, the Raiders need a quarterback. I want to know what you guys think, man. Do you guys think Mark Davis should you know, make it mandatory to go out there and get a quarterback? Should he force Tom Telesco to make that decision? Let me know what you guys think, man. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.